I'm joined today by Michael Wood Jr., who's a former police officer with the Baltimore Police Department, a whistleblower on misconduct that he saw during his time there. Michael, it's so great to talk to you. You caused this storm on social media when you started tweeting about some of the examples of police misconduct that you say you witnessed while you were on the Baltimore police force. Set the stage for us. When did you become a police officer at Baltimore, and how long was your tenure there?
I became a police officer in January of 2003 after I served 4 years in the Marine Corps. I was about 23 years old, and I just wanted to go be an urban cop and went into the police department, went through patrol, did foot patrol, did it in a car, worked bad neighborhoods, worked good neighborhood. Well, that's even a weird thing to say in itself. I worked low crime areas and high crime areas. uh, Worked narcotics in plain clothes and what's called a knocker. And then I did major case squad stuff. And then I was a sergeant in the Eastern District where I ran a squad and occasionally the shift in the Johns Hopkins area, one of the higher crime neighborhoods in the world.
And what would you say, you said you wanted to work in an urban police force. What are the main differences or characteristics that make working in an urban police force different from maybe in smaller towns or other parts of the country?
Um, so for me, I'm thinking nothing but fun. It's where the action is. It's where you're going to get a lot of the calls. It's where you're going to, a comp in a high volume call volume city like Baltimore is going to get experience in a year that most cops in this nation don't have in their entire careers. So it's about being in the heat of things. That's why I went into the Marine Corps and not into the Coast Guard. I wanted to go into the heat all the time. So that's why I wanted to go to urban. And from being in the military, I didn't want to travel anymore. So things like the CIA and the DEA and stuff like that were off the table. I didn't want to do that.
So, talk to us generally speaking, and then we'll drill down into some of the specifics of the types of misconduct that you started to observe when you were on the force, and sort of the awakening that you had to what the policing tactics were.
It's not as though I'm going to say that it's not something you see when it's happening and you see a transgression. You don't think of it as a crime or something like that. You think of it as those bad people that almost anybody has in any job. So you're just thinking, oh, that guy's an asshole. That guy did this. He has his problems or she has her problems. But you're not recognizing how you're protecting your own in there. It's your responsibility to notice these transgressions and to do something about them, but you don't because of this us versus them mentality, thin blue line. It's not even something you really think about. So you see those things throughout your entire career. You don't even analyze them to think of them as even being something. It really wasn't until I was out of the department on the other side of the badge that I started just evaluating what that would be like if it was happening in my front door. Like how would I feel if cops were running around my neighborhood doing those kind of things? And you just put that into a little perspective to see that that's obviously not what I would want.
And what are some of the examples of what you saw that you've since come public with?
Oh, so I mean, hitting handcuffed suspects, assaulting people that had nothing to do with anything, making up entirely fake probable cause statements to raid houses, making 911 calls so that you can get into a house. So a cop would go and call 911 and say they heard somebody inside that was yelling for help. So then they would respond to the house and conveniently hear someone yelling for help, and then we'd be able to kick in the door and get into the house. You see exaggerated car stops, just going to car stop to car stop when there's not really any probable cause for the car stops. And it's really everything that you've pretty much heard in urban lore for a very long time that's in your NWA songs throughout history. It's everything you've heard.
And talk to us a little bit about you've spoken about the racial disproportionality that is sometimes applied when making decisions about interactions with citizens. Talk to us about what you observed there with regard to the race of supposed suspects.
that's another thing that I never even realized until I was out. When you're in, you are assigned to these neighborhoods, and I have a bachelor's in criminal justice. So even in schooling, you're taught these concepts of going to the high crime area. You're taught these ideas of that these neighborhoods. You know, they actually have like geographic uh, philosophies in policing where you're not profiling people, you're just profiling the geography, or it's area enforcement, or it's things like the easiest one to recognize is when people say criminal profiling. And what we say in criminal justice or in the policing is that we're looking at these individuals, and the most individuals that commit crime in Baltimore by your stats are like 16 to 24-year-old black males. But you're basing that off of the fact that they were arrested previously. And why were they arrested previously would be the key question. And that's because we would have things like racial profiling that are inherent in us. We have things in Baltimore where we have geographic limitations on where people could live intentionally by the governor, the mayor of Baltimore in the past signed things and through housing legislations, even through the federals that put poor black people in certain neighborhoods and cut off all their resources and essentially made this geography a high crime area because of racist actions that occurred in the past. And what we see now is that this is a high crime area. We don't see and go back through history and see how it was intentionally designed that way, how police were the original slave catchers. And so if you're catching a slave and then they get a record, well, then when they're free, you're focusing on their crime because they have a record. And then you're looking at them again because they have a record. And it's a cycle that doesn't affect other people. And when it doesn't affect you, you don't care. And I suddenly realized how much it would have affected me if those same conditions were applied to me when I was growing up. If people have drugs. White guys have been known to carry drugs at the exact same rate as black guys. That's statistically irrelevant. But you're looking at them. So then you lock them up for that. And then you are then looking at them again because you locked them up before, whereas that cycle never even started with me because I would have never been checked. So no one would have ever seen that there were drugs in my pocket to begin with.
Okay, so that's a pretty good explanation of sort of at the systemic level how you can hide a racially tinged policy under geographic policing or just looking at crime statistics. Talk to us a little bit about what you observed at the individual officer level. In other words, were you party to, or did you overhear sort of candid discussions among officers where they recognize, yeah, given the option, if I see, as you say, a white guy or a black guy potentially committing a particular crime, were there candid discussions of giving preference to pursuing the black guy?
As far as I'm concerned, overt racism at least in Baltimore, does not exist. There is no conversations like that would be allowed. So the question then is that do these conversations not take place? Like I think they don't. Or do they take place? They just don't take place around someone like me who kind of grew up in an environment and had friends that wouldn't accept this kind of thing. So if it took place, it wasn't something that I ever saw. It was the societal and cultural things such as movies and history just teaching you things to like fear the black man. So then there's this subconscious bias that we see that comes up in things like resumes or trusting people because of their names, getting into college, just all these various little things that pop up that play into your subconscious. Those things get played out, and we have to recognize those things. I really don't believe that conscious racism is a very prominent thing, at least in big city policing.
Were there other officers that you worked with in Baltimore that shared your concerns? And I know you mentioned that you didn't really have an awakening to a lot of what was going on until after you left the force. To the extent that you were aware of this while you were working, were there conversations with other officers where you said, hey, I'm noticing this. What do you think?
I never believed in the drug war, so you didn't have to convince me of that. I participated in fighting the drug war because that's where the action was.
Sure.
So it's not like I had some kind of revelation with that. Where I started to see injustices was internally in the department. So There was promotional issues with the blacks in the agency where they were kind of disadvantaged, and people that were marginalized were disadvantaged to the good old boy network and getting promotions. They would punish black officers more harshly than they would punish white officers when they went through the IID system. So I really started to see the injustices there, and I started to fight a lot of the injustices while I was in that were internal that I recognized. And I had a lot of people supporting me through that because I was, that guy that said everything that you wanted to say but didn't have the balls to say.
Sure.
And but when it comes to like assaults and violations on the street, you would see things and you would be like, that guy is a butthole. Why did he have to do that? But like the discussion never took place. Like, we would tell them to stop, but it was never like, oh, I'm going to turn them in for something like that. So it's not like I wonder what they're really talking about now that I've come out and kind of laid this out in a very easy to understand kind of way, what the conversations are like. But when I was there, a lot of us knew that the drug war was futile and things like that, but we didn't see the big systemic picture.
All right. Michael Wood Jr., former officer with the Baltimore Police Department. Thanks so much for sharing your story and talking to us about your experience.
No problem there.